Howdy, everyone. I am Joni Carswell. I'm the CEO at Texan by Nature. Thank you so much for joining us today. I want to welcome you to the third session of our virtual series. We're thrilled to have leaders joining us from all over the state, industry leaders, conservation leaders, community leaders, landowners. We're excited to have each of you join us in this conversation. As many of you know, many of you partner with us, Texan by Nature exists to advance conservation. We act as a catalyst for our conservation partners and projects across the state, and we act as a strategic resource for industry to bring conservation and industry together. We believe that the future of Texas, the future of our economy, the future of our health relies on conservation. It really depends on these groups coming together to conserve our wonderful state. And so we're excited to be here today to share projects that demonstrate the type of collaborative conservation that's needed and also demonstrate the type of return good conservation can yield. Positive return not only for taking care of our natural resources, but positive return in terms of economic growth and human health. The projects that we'll be presenting today are part of the Texan by Nature Conservation Wrangler program. The Conservation Wrangler program is one of our premier programs where 6 projects are selected based off an application process. The application process takes place November to January each year. And once these 6 projects are selected, Texan by Nature works with these projects to help in any way possible to expand the impact and the reach of the projects that have been selected. So we are excited to share some of these projects from previous years today. So given what 2020 dealt all of us, I'm assuming that you probably know how to use Zoom at this point, but if not, just take a look at the bottom of your screen and you should see a Q&A bubble area. We do want to make this a conversation, not a one-way presentation. So please, as you have questions, feel free to enter those questions in that Q&A throughout the time today. And we'll answer as many as we can live at the end of this session, but we will also follow up after and answer every single question in writing at the end of the series. So please do participate. If you're unable to see that Q&A button, feel free to send us a question live at info@texanbynature.org. So 2 ways to submit questions, the Q&A bubble or info@texanbynature.org. As we get started today, I really want to give a heartfelt thank you to all of our members and our sponsors who have made today's series and all of our work possible and free for all to attend. First, I want to thank 2 iconic Texas brands, HEB and Dell Technologies, for underwriting our summit this year, which will actually take place on April 20th. So be on the lookout for more information about that, but also many other brands that have partnered with Texan by Nature throughout 2020 and into this year to make sure that conservation programs can continue to happen through Texan by Nature. We'd also like to thank our program and project sponsors, Enbridge and Phillips 66, for underwriting our Conservation Wrangler program, and the Lyda Hill Foundation for underwriting our Conservation Partner program. We could not do the work that we do without your support. So thank you very, very much from each of us. So today we're going to hear from projects that are both urban and rural in nature. They are all realizing positive returns on their conservation projects, as I mentioned earlier, not only in terms of natural resources, but in terms of health, behavior, education, air quality, water quality, economic development, wildlife, from tree planting in urban settings and schoolyards with the Texas Trees Foundation, to recharging the Ogallala Aquifer through Playa restoration with the Texas Playa Conservation Initiative, to reef restoration on Sabine Lake with the Coastal Conservation Association. These projects show how to develop returns, not only for the near term, but for our future. As the population of Texas grows, we're expected to extend to 47 million Texans in 2050. It's critical that we engage in and replicate projects that sustain our resources, that sustain our health, that sustain the booming economy that we all enjoy. So today's projects have proven methodologies and best practices. They can be replicated. I hope that you will ask many questions throughout the session today, and think about how you can take these learnings back to your own organizations, to your own communities, and perhaps start similar initiatives where you are. So today we will begin with Samantha Bradley from the Texas Trees Foundation. We're excited for you to hear more about her project. Samantha?
I'm the Cool School Manager for Texas Trees Foundation. Got the presentation.
Samantha, can you not see the presentation?
Oh, there we go. Thank you, I can. Perfect. Well, as stated, I'm the Cool School Manager for the Texas Tree Foundation, which really works to bring outdoor classrooms, among other things, to Texas schools for immersive nature learning. And next. And I'm here today to really just briefly share with you about our mission and goals, some of our impacts and our accomplishments and how we're going to expand. So focusing first on mission and goals. Next. So really at the Texas Tree Foundation, our mission is quite simple, and it's dedicating, we are dedicated to connecting people with trees to create greener, cleaner, and healthier cities. And really this mission just goes right within our Cool School program, just kind of associating it with school grounds. So we work to increase tree canopy and biodiversity, promote land and environmental stewardship, and support healthy communities. And education, outdoor education, is our primary focus. And why that's so important to us is that we know that spending time outside increases subject matter retention, thinking, and problem-solving skills inside the classroom for our students. And so that's really our focus, and that's what we've been striving towards. So what does that look like, or how does that really kind of translate to logistics on a campus? Well, we spend a year to 2 years working with these teachers and students. So this is not a program where we just plop some trees in the ground and run. We really establish a relationship with these schools. So we first established a green team with teachers and staff. And then throughout that first year, we work with those teachers to create a tailored landscape plan specific to their school, looking at the outdoor classroom area, how to design it, what they want in the outdoor classroom area, where they want to see trees, and then where they're going to put their park if it's applicable, if they're a Cool School park. Throughout the year, we're also providing educational resources to the teachers. Really working to empower the teachers to get the students outside. That following year, we planned a school-wide planting day with the school, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Towards the end of our time, we'll host a celebration day with events and activities, but even there, we're not done at that school. We'll stay there for another year to 2 years, monitoring and watering the trees that we planted, and just looking at the impact that we had for the students in the environment. Next. So one of our key issues that was identified in our early research when we were looking at Dallas and working with the city of Dallas was that not only is Dallas, as a lot of us know, one of the fastest growing, hottest cities in the US, but in particular, Dallas ISD school campuses were identified as the hottest sites with less than 7% tree canopy coverage. And so we knew that we needed a program that would focus on those areas and that we could have a greater impact if we focused on schools. So our goal really in our work to mitigate that, the negative effects of the urban heat, the pollution, asthma, the energy costs, among other things, was to work to increase the tree canopy to 20% on average among those 150 plus Dallas ISD's elementary schools. So how does this translate into action? Well, on each school campus, like I said, we do a school-wide tree planting day. And I'm really proud to say that in spite of, the pandemic and everything, we were still able in 2020 calendar year to plant over 500 trees on on 8 elementary campuses. And we're still working this year with schools, and our estimation that we'll plant an estimated 800 trees on 5 elementaries, 2 middle and 1 high school this year. And these photos are an example from Guzik Elementary on the south side of Dallas, where we planted 92 trees. So another issue that I kind of talked about and that we looked at was the nature deficit disorder. This basically translates to plain English, just that children, as we know, are spending more time inside on electronics and less time outside. And so how do we help with that? Well, our goal is to increase student time outdoors and really create that land stewardship. And so some actions that we're going to look at that the Texas Trees does is providing that outdoor education curriculum, forestry lessons, as well as actually constructing outdoor classrooms and really just activating every space of the campus we can with amenities where students can take their learning outside. So this campaign, we started in 2017, where 70% of Dallas elementary schools had that 7% or less tree canopy coverage, limited outdoor learning. As of next year, we're proud to say that 33 campuses will have that average 20% canopy coverage, 28 with learning areas, which is a projected 3,000 trees planted at schools, which we think is a huge success. We plan to continue our program, and with the hopes of by 2025, at least 55 schools will have our Cool School program with the components outlined, which would be 1/4 of all Dallas ISD schools. So again, just briefly, our program is so much more than just about planting trees and leaving. We really work with the schools in every aspect. We want the kids involved in every way of the tree planting. We want them to be safe, but also to feel safe inside, outside. We want them to be empowered, to not be afraid of the dirt and be afraid to explore. But really, it's also about finding the urban forest, right in their backyard. And so we really love, just working with students and getting them to see that. So some of my favorite components, these are just some examples, but like I said, in addition to the actual curriculum and the work we do with the teachers, we're also actually building items for the students to use. And most of our items are kind of in 1 of 5 categories. We work with social emotional learning, music and the arts, free play, nature, and science. So a little bit about our next kind of where we're headed. A few years ago, there was 2 years ago, there was an interlocal agreement between Dallas ISD and Dallas Parks and Recreation. And this really kind of helped transform our Cool Schools, not to just be for the school use, but expanded to neighborhood use. And so through kind of examining some data, there were areas prioritized with needs for increase in park access. And so with these Cool School parks that I'm going to show you, it will provide an additional park access, so a 10-minute walk or half mile to a park to another 115,000 people in Dallas by next year. And so this will just keep growing. So again, as I stated, in addition to kind of the tree and urban forestry initiatives that we're doing, the park access campaign starting in 2019, with only 60% of Dallas having a 10-minute or half mile park access. By next year, they'll increase to 69%. And with these additional schools that we hope to do, by 2025, 78% of Dallas will now have a park within 10 minutes. And so what do these parks look like? Well, they're simple, but they're strategic, and I think the money is well spent. So again, in addition to all the other amenities that we place in the campus, we're opening up these school grounds to neighborhoods. And by doing so, working with the school and the community, we're designing these playgrounds with really fun equipment equipment that promotes kind of free play and a lot of parkour, embankment slides, swings, accessible items for the entire community, as well as an access point to the neighborhood. So now these school grounds are open to the community to use on after school and on the weekends. With that entry portal, they can kind of walk in. We do a loop trail around the campus to promote, them to be able to actually, experience the nature components that we added. So we think this is a really great opportunity that we are continuously we're hoping to continue this effort with Dallas ISD and Parks and Rec in the future. So how can you get involved? I listed some various ways. I'd love to talk with any of you individually, but the best way is you could volunteer at a future school planting in the fall, hopefully when it's safe again, or get your company involved. The easiest thing to remember is texastrees.org. There you can find donation opportunities, volunteer opportunities, or just more information about the Cool School program. You can follow us on any of the social media outlets, subscribe to our monthly newsletter, or like I said, feel free to contact me directly at Samantha@texastrees.org.
Thank you so much, Samantha. The work that you guys are doing is truly transformational, not only for the schools, but for the communities. And I love the aspect of making the access available and, within minutes of every family in Dallas. We did have a quick question before we move on. The curriculum that you mentioned, is it TxN aligned?
So yeah, we have two, yes, and yes. We have various components of our curriculum. So we do curriculum where we do TxN aligned science curriculum that aligns with a lot of our outdoor learning features like weather stations or soil observation units. But in addition to that, we do supplemental curriculum that doesn't directly align with science, but it promotes, some reading, writing, and other higher order skills that would be needed for each grade level.
Fantastic. And is there opportunity for other organizations who maybe want to replicate your work to learn from your curriculum and potentially build on it in their own communities?
Yeah, I think so. I think those are conversations that could be had. This is something that, we want to share with others. And if there's other communities, we work specifically in DFW right now. We're DFW centered. So if there was opportunities where other people were excited in San Antonio or Houston or other areas, we would definitely love to share how we're doing what we're doing.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Samantha.
Thank you.
So we will move on to the second presentation of the day, which is happening in a different part of the state. Excited for Rachel Fern from the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department to share what a Playa is and what's happening with the Texas Playa Conservation Initiative. So Rachel, please take it away.
Awesome, thanks. So my name is Rachel Fern. I'm the State Wetland Program Leader for Texas Parks and Wildlife. So this is a program that we started in 2015 in partnership with Playa Lakes Joint Venture. And we joined the Conservation Wrangler program with Texan by Nature in 2018. So next slide, please. All right, so what are playas? I know plenty of people probably already know, but just in case, they are clay-lined basins and they are the lowest point of a self-contained watershed. So they're runoff and rainfall dependent. So naturally, they're not supplied by any groundwater. And in other areas, they have other names, like in Nebraska, they call them rainwater basins. So that might sound familiar. There are similar structures up in the prairie pothole region, the prairie potholes. Those were actually formed a little differently than these. And actually, as far as playas go, there are a few theories as to how these were formed. And what these theories agree on is that the playa basins were perennial lakes and marshes during the last glacial maximum, or the ice age. So they're low-lying bowls, they were compacted in the landscape, and they dried up completely about 8,000 years ago. And then that created the kind of wet dry cycle we're familiar with today. Next slide, please. So these little bowls of water on the landscape are very important ecologically. This is just sort of a generalized list of the diversity you can find in any one single playa. They also provide excellent hunting opportunities, which at Texas Parks and Wildlife, providing public hunting access is a big part of our mission. And also the drying out period, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, is actually really, really important to the hydrological cycle. So this is not your typical wetland. We want water to stay on the landscape year round. So the drying part of this hydrological cycle is very important for groundwater recharge. And this is where we kind of get into the sharing the resource thing. Next slide. So I don't know if you can play that animation, Jody. Excellent. Okay, it looks like it'll play. So this is a really nice animation showing how playas generally function. So you can see the rain starting to fill there. Those cracks are actually left behind from the last dry period. Those are cracks in the clay, and the water can actually travel down through the clay pan, through those cracks, and along root systems that penetrate that clay layer. And that's how the Ogallala Aquifer is recharged almost on the entirety of its existence. That is how it's recharged, by these clay basins. So as the water dries up, the clay swells and those cracks shut, and the water spills over the edge of the clay basin and goes back down into the aquifer. So that's the last little bit of recharge. The rest of it evaporates, which is not a bad thing. Sometimes it's a bad thing, but it's actually not a bad thing for these playas, because once it dries up, you can see those cracks are now reformed, because that's the way clay functions, right? It gets wet, it swells up, it forms a nice clay pan layer that's impenetrable. When it dries up, there are cracks that are formed. So, next slide, please. So this is just a schematic showing the process demonstrated in the animation, but it's static, so it's readable in PDF form in case you need to print this, or I didn't know how this was going to be presented ultimately. So that was there just in case. It's the same process. It's just all in one picture. Next slide, please. Sorry, you can go ahead and load all that. I left my animations up from a previous presentation. So, all right. So the recharge rate is actually really slow here, especially in the southern part of the Ogallala Aquifer, which is where we are. So it takes about 10 to 50 years for a full inch recharge. Or another way to put it is anywhere around the Texas Panhandle that is over the Ogallala Aquifer, you get about 0.02 to 8.1 inches a year, depending on the area, but the average is about 1 inch per year. And the soil is sandier the further south that you go over the aquifer, so it recharges quicker, a little bit quicker on the southern part of the aquifer. And so what's really unique about the Ogallala is that there's very little horizontal groundwater flow. So across the high plains, you might get an average of about 12 inches a day horizontal, which is not what you see in a lot of other aquifers. And this plays into kind of how we've found a way to share this resource with agricultural producers. So next slide, please. All right, so these are the playas that are located over the Ogallala Aquifer. This was in 2015. I can't remember the year that these numbers were generated. You can go ahead and press the next button. That little bubble will show up. So these are the playas in Texas. Keeping true to our nature, Texas has the most and the biggest playas. So we have about 23,000, a little over 23,000 playas. And a little over 4,000 of those are actually functional. 5,600 or so are we consider at risk. So they will fill with water, but they're not functioning the way they're supposed to. Either they don't dry out because someone has a well on the property or a ditch to funnel water. And over 13,000 of those are not functional, completely not functional. They're either actively in production or they've been completely tile drained off. Next slide, please. So the number one threat to playas today are pits and ditches that are dug. A lot of times these were dug prior to the present day ownership. So a lot of times the landowner will acquire a piece of property that has a playa on it and it already has a ditch or a pit that was dug either for irrigation or for livestock watering. Another way is with roads. So you can click the next button. So some siltation and sedimentation issues that are associated with road construction. Generally, there's not much thought put to, oh, this is a clay basin. The soils are a little different here. We'll instead make this road curvy instead of straight. That's typically not part of the conversation. So what we see is a lot of these playas get split down the middle, or they get split into 6 different parts and they silt in. So next slide, thank you. So this is kind of where we come in. This is the way that Texas PCI functions. We identify these playas that have pits or ditches dug on them already. And we contact those landowners, offer to backfill those pits in grass buffered playas. And we also will help establishing some grass buffer around a playa to stop or slow that sedimentation, that siltation from any kind of nearby construction or land production. We pay 100% of that restoration cost. So any kind of earth moving costs associated with that, soil purchase, if we need to bring dirt in, we hire and pay the contractor directly. And then we also pay the landowner a one-time incentive payment. So right now, that's at $80 an acre. So, and that's based on Playa Basin acreage. So if your Playa Basin is, 40 acres, which a lot of times we find playas that have a ditch dug in them that the construction cost is a fraction of what the landowner gets because the Playa Basin is so huge and it just takes that tiny little ditch to pull all the water off of it. And then there's a 10-year agreement attached, so that prevents future pit creation. And a lot of the landowners we work with are super great, and they have no intention of putting a pit or a ditch back in the playa. They just want their playa to be restored and functional again. Next slide, please. Thank you. So like I said, we identify those playas, we contact the landowners, we fix the playa, and then we're out of their hair. So they are left with a beautiful functional playa that attracts wildlife and recharges their own personal groundwater, because like I said, there's really not much horizontal movement in the Ogallala aquifer, into the Texas Panhandle at least. And so anything that gets recharged through their playa ends up going straight to their water well, or if they have a well tied to a pivot irrigation system, or just their own house, if they're using it for household use. Next slide. So we've got a total, as of today, 56 restoration projects completed. So that's about 2,400 Playa and Sabine Lake acres that have been restored since 2015. 15 of those projects, and about 781 acres of that was just in 2020 alone. And we've paid out about $157,000 directly to landowners as incentive payments. So we also have an additional 114 private acres under agreement right now, and we add almost every day, which is exciting. And this is kind of our footprint on the landscape. So these are the counties that we're in. So I know it's not a very sophisticated map, but this is kind of where we're at right now. We're very excited to finally have entered into Dallam County up in the northwestern panhandle. And this is actually the last playa of a very large 9 complex playa system that was restored, all been restored in the last 10 years, actually, that spans from southern Colorado, New Mexico, and now finally into Rita Blanca National Grasslands on federal land there, which is completely available to the public, and it's a huge playa complex and it's great. The other thing we're really excited about is that we just got into Palmer County, which, if anyone's familiar with the success story of Clovis, New Mexico, and them really taking ownership of their groundwater and essentially becoming almost self-sufficient, their municipality, because they are very geared towards, conserving their groundwater. We have finally met up with them at that point, and everybody knows that it's better to have a large complex of contiguous restoration than have little pockets. Little pockets are great because they can build to bigger things, but we finally made that connection, and we're super excited to get work done there pretty soon. And so these are our partnerships. We work with Playa Lake's joint venture a lot. We also have worked with Texan by Nature, which has been great for us. We also work with Ogallala Commons, which is a nonprofit dedicated to conserving the resources of the Ogallala Aquifer, and the High Plains Water District, Ducks Unlimited, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and RCS. We have ventured into some academic affiliations as well. So we're growing every day. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so we actually do quite a bit of public engagement. The whole purpose of the program is to serve the public through the conservation of natural resources. So we work with Ogallala Commons and the High Plains Water District to hold Playa Field Days. And that's where landowners can come and learn about the ecology of their playas and balancing water conservation and land production. And then also Texan by Nature helped us design these really nice mailings that we send to landowners in target areas. And that has gotten a really good response too. And so these are kind of the takeaways that we try to tell any landowners that are interested in our program. Playas are the primary source to recharge to the aquifer. And that while the recharge can't make up for losses from irrigation, just because it is such a large, slowly recharging aquifer, it is enough to support rain-fed systems, grazing operations, which is a big part of the Texas Panhandle, and also municipalities. So if you conserve a playa, that water is yours. So you are helping yourself and you're helping the wildlife at the same time. So as far as the future for us, we've had a great response from individual landowners, but our next step involves scaling up. So similar to what Clovis, New Mexico did as a municipality, this is kind of on our radar for the near future. We've identified about 18 other towns that are very similar in as far as like the aquifer state below the land, and also the demographic, the population size of those small towns, that we think we could recreate the success that happened in Clovis, New Mexico. So we're excited about that. And this is just kind of a summation of what we try to do. So common resources are tricky. Well, we want to show that the resources can be shared and that the stewardship can be shared as well. So the goal is not to end dairy farming or to end agriculture or to strategically take away wildlife habitat and chalk it up as a loss. We want to support and highlight ways that we can share so that everybody gets to use the resource. And that is all I have today.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Congratulations on the progress that you guys have made. I'm excited for the next phase of getting the municipalities involved and really even expanding the impact. A couple of comments. A couple of years ago, when this project presented at our summit, we saw a lot of interest from industry. So this project really reaches so many aspects because there are so many landowners that are on top of that Ogallala aquifer that are individual landowners. Industry owns that land, cities own that land, and it's I love the rising tide lifts all boats. It's true, and I think the work that you are doing shows this. From a migratory bird perspective, are you guys starting to do counts and see increases or improvements in the bird habitat as you're doing the playa restoration, or do you have any commentary on that front, Rachel?
Yeah, we do. So we perform our own midwinter waterfowl surveys in the Panhandle every year, and it's difficult to judge this year and this past year just because it's been so remarkably dry, which is good for our work because we're able to get equipment in there and do the restoration before it starts raining again. But we have seen a pretty, the statistics aren't finished yet, but it's a pretty substantial increase in especially sandhill crane use and migrating geese. Yeah, we've definitely seen an increase in that. We hope to continue to see more of an increase, especially as we create these larger contiguous spans of restored playas rather than little pockets. So yeah, we hope to be able to see those trends a little clearer soon.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Rachel. And I
Thank
know
you.
there's a question about how local businesses and urban residents can help. We will follow up with that question, but also know that the websites will be available, and we'll do a survey after this session as well for those of you who want to connect directly with Rachel to help this program move forward and gain more momentum. So moving across the state to a different initiative, we have John Blaha from the Coastal Conservation Association joining us. So John, excited to hear from you.
Hey, thank you, John Ed. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with this virtual seminar today. Today we're going to talk about oysters. I think everybody loves oysters. At least, well, most of my friends like them anyway. But we'll talk about the Sabine Lake Oyster Restoration Project. This was an effort led by Texas Parks and Wildlife. They were the lead on the project, and Building Conservation Trust, which is Coastal Conservation Association's National Habitat Initiative, and Coastal Conservation Association in Texas, were all partners in this project. CCA was primarily, we were funding partners for the effort. The project started out early, kind of a smaller project in 2018, and to restore some oyster habitat in that area. And then once prices came back, they literally quadrupled in a very short period of time, and we kind of slowed us down. We came back and started able to secure some Parks and Wildlife secured some Harvey Relief Fund dollars, and we made the project grow. So oysters, like I said, oysters. Everybody loves oysters, and they're saltwater bivalve. They live in marsh and brackish waters. And oysters, they create important habitats for hundreds of other marine species. They filter and clean water in the surrounding areas. And the species like mollusks and barnacles and sea anemones, they all attract to them. They settle in, and they create a food source for commercially valuable fish species. Oysters provide habitats for forage fish and other invertebrates and other shellfish. And they provide a safe nursery for these valuable species that are commercially harvested. As Texans, we all love blue crab, croaker, speckled trout, redfish, shrimp, stone crab, and so forth. Oysters, they're a crucial component to a healthy ecosystem. They provide food and jobs, and above all, they provide habitat. They can serve as barriers to storms, to tides. They help prevent erosion, and they protect productive estuary waters. One little side note, and this always kind of brings it home for me, and when I talk to different groups, kids, whatever, a single oyster can filter 50 gallons of water in a single day. I don't know how many people know that, but you think about an oyster reef, and that one little guy can filter up to 50 gallons of water a day. That's pretty. You think about it from an ecological sense, that's really important. If you can advance one time, please. The history of the depletion of the oyster resources goes back for over 100 years. Back in the late 1800s, 1900s, they dredged reefs for construction purposes, road bases, and then as people began to fish for them, that became, I'm gonna say, the #1 culprit in the depletion of these resources. Ongoing threats to the oysters mean that if we don't take deliberate efforts and make deliberate effort to restore and protect them, we're in the danger of losing the benefits of these reefs and the services that they provide. When we fish these reefs just purely for commercial oyster meat, they're going to become degraded if we don't take care of them. But when we restore them and we manage them as a sustainable resource, oyster reefs and the habitat they provide, they contribute billions of dollars back into local economies and billions of dollars worth of ecosystem value. NOAA has identified oysters, in oyster restoration as a conservation priority throughout the U.S. Advance, please. Sabine Lake, this particular project focuses on Sabine Lake. Sabine Lake is a unique estuary ecosystem. It's the freshest Texas estuary along the coast. The eastern half is under Louisiana law and management, And over time, there's been a lot of industrial development down the lower end, as well as ship channel and dredge islands along the western border. Advance. The goals of this project were to restore number one, restore degraded habitat and create new habitat. We wanted to advance, use this as a way to advance the science of coastal habitat and marine conservation, foster habitat stewardship, and educate coastal communities on the value of conservation. Next. This project, it was executed to replace this historical reefing site that had been killed off, again, primarily due to development and dredging that had occurred in the area. 3,900 cubic yards of material were placed they were placed in 4 cubic yard mounds that were 10 foot in diameter, 2 foot high. And they placed these mounds on 20-foot centers throughout the project. Next. The effort filled up basically 5.5 acres of a 27-acre permitted site. There was some reefing done in this site in 2015. And although this reef had not been harvested or fished in 40 plus years, Louisiana at the time was considering allowing commercial harvest on the reef within the Louisiana waters. This was a big driver to secure the funds and approvals for additional reefing within the Texas side to offset any potential commercial harvest and to enhance the valuable oyster habitat in the event harvest was allowed on the Sabine Lake side. Advance. As you can see in this particular slide, if you look in the top of the slide, you'll see the rows of mounds and how they were created. This was from the early reefing, and the most recent reefing, like I mentioned, there was 3,900 cubic yards of material placed, and that created over 970 mounds within that system. Not only does it create a great habitat and a service to the ecosystem, but it's going to be a great fishing habitat for the local recreational fishermen. Next. What are the benefits of the project? As I mentioned, it creates the ecosystem services and it creates great fishing habitat. Those saying give a man a fish and he has food for a day, well, that leads to he's going to spend a lot of money. He's going to spend money on rods and reels, lures, tackle boxes, boats, equipment for the boats. He's going to spend money on gas. He's going to spend money on lodging. He's going to spend money on food. So it's a trickle down effect to the economy and it's a benefit to all. Next. What is the power of recreational angling? I don't think people realize the strength of recreational angling and what it does. It's the second most popular outdoor activity in the United States. More Americans fish than they play golf and tennis combined. There's twice as many people fished in 2016 that attended all NFL football games. Anglers spend more time on fishing gear and trips than Americans spend on Valentine's Day, Easter, and Halloween. But let's not forget Valentine's Day. It's coming around the corner, guys. So let's take care of our ladies, and vice versa. And recreational fishing, it's generated an annual revenue of more than $52 billion. That's more than Lockheed Martin, Macy's, and Kellogg's. So it's a huge boost to the entire economy. Next slide, please. What is the economic impact of recreational fishing in the Sabine Lake estuary? It brings 450 jobs. It brings $15.5 million in annual labor income. It brings almost $24.5 million in value-added contributions to the Texas GDP. Over $42 million in output of sales and values of goods and services. And in this particular case, 98% of that economic impact comes from local anglers. Next, please. A similar project that was executed by Texas Nature Conservancy in 2013-14, they executed a 54-acre restored oyster habitat within Matagorda Bay on the historic Half Moon Reef site. This study, they did an economic study that was completed in August of 2015 and 16, and this here shows the value of, from an economic standpoint, back to the society, local economies. What's the results? 94% of the anglers said our fishing was that much better in that area. The Half Moon Reef, site alone, it generated $691,000 to the Texas GDP. Another $1.2 million in economic activity annually in that area, and it created 12 new jobs, resulting in over $600,000 in annual labor income. So the impact is, in addition, obviously, the obvious impact to the ecosystem and the value to the ecosystem, but the value to the local economies and the local fishermen. Next, please. Moving forward, and where's, what has CCA Texas done? CCA Texas, Building Conservation Trust, Parks and Wildlife, all of our partners, they're committed to oyster restoration efforts and the legislative processes to protect this resource. CCA Texas has worked with partners including Texas Parks and Wildlife, Art Research out of Texas A&M Corpus Christi, Coastal Bend Basin Estuaries Program, Galveston Bay Foundation, and others to restore and create oyster habitat up and down the Texas coast. These restoration efforts include work in Sabine Lake as most recent, East Galveston Bay, Ramses Bay, Copano Bay, St. Charles Bay. They also funded a oyster restoration locator map. Oyster restoration is going to be important, as I keep saying, for generations to come. We worked with Art Research to fund a locator map that took decades of data from Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and others to create this locator map. CCA Texas has been working with oysters, working on oysters at the Capitol and within the Parks and Wildlife regulatory processes. In 2017, we helped establish House Bill 51, which created a license buyback program, and it requires dealers to put the actual seafood dealers to put 30% of the shell they take back into the bays. It increased penalties for harvesting undersized oysters. And in 2017, we also helped create regulations that lower the threshold of undersized oysters in possession to 5% of catch. It was much higher prior to that. It closed oyster harvest to 100 yards offshore of every shoreline to allow these estuarine waters to thrive with the oyster reefs. Closed harvest on Saturdays. Saturdays and Sundays are now closed. You can only fish during the week. And it permanently closed oyster in several nursery bays. It included Christmas Bay, Cronquo Bay, Horn Lake, Hines Bay, San Antonio Bay, and South Bay. And it reduced sack limits to 30 sacks a day. In 2019, we worked again with the Texas legislature to enhance the penalties for harvesting in these closed waters, and made it a violation where everybody on that boat gets a citation. So there's got to be accountability within this fishery, not only on the commercial side, but the recreational guys as well. We've got to take care of the resource. We're going to continue to work with Parks and Wildlife and legislature to make sure that the resource is taken care of. In the future, as we work through this, we'll continue to have these great returns. We'll continue to have a healthy ecosystem with a healthy oyster reef. Again, I want to thank you all for this opportunity to present today. Please don't hesitate to contact us at the office through I think you're going to give our emails out, and we'll help in any way we can.
Excellent. Thank you so much, John. It's hard to believe that a little oyster can filter 50 gallons of water a day. Every time I hear this stat, I'm amazed each time. But you mentioned a locator map. Can you share how folks can locate that locator map?
I wish I would put that on slide.
And if you see this,
I'm trying to remember, I can share it later. Art Research, Dr. Jenny Pollock, her staff produced this map, and I'm trying to remember the name of the website. And Shane, if Shane's listening, he might be able to pop in on the Q&A and put that web address on there. It's escaping me at the moment.
Yeah, that's okay. We will share it after for all
Absolutely.
that would like to see that locator map. And then Rachel and Samantha, if you guys would come back on video to join in the Q&A. And as they're joining us, John, I do have another question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
What do you recommend as the first step for others who are wanting to replicate the work that you guys have done? What is their first step?
The first step is working with Parks and Wildlife. Parks and Wildlife is the leader in this. You will have to get your permits through Parks and Wildlife. There's general land office leases that are involved, and in the future, there's opportunities to get involved. Heart Research does some community outreach with a lot of the schools in the coastal bend area where they do oyster bagging events, and go down these shorelines that need protection. They'll place the bags out, as well as Galveston Bay Foundation. That's as an individual, those are the best ways to get involved. Now, there was recent legislation passed to create an oyster mariculture business within the state of Texas. Texas was the last state to have oyster mariculture. I'm aware of one permit request that's just been submitted. This will take pressure, hopefully this will take some pressure off it from a commercial standpoint, that these mariculture sites will provide that half shell oyster to the markets and take the pressure off of our wild reefs. I mean, these reefs are wet, right? They're going to be in the bays, they're along the shorelines, but it'll take some half shell pressure off those public reefs, if you would.
Fantastic. Again, exciting progress on the project. And coming along the theme of today, which is around, developing future returns, I know that most of our partners would struggle with articulating the data and the impact and getting at what is the value of some of this conservation long term. And John, you gave great data on anglers being some of the biggest spenders in the world, and the impact that for recreational fishing has on a local economy. I'd like to go around and hear from each of you the biggest challenge you've overcome in measuring the return of your project, and how we should be looking at this as leaders in Texas to drive our future. So looking at the economic value, looking at the health value, looking at the natural resource value, what advice do you guys have for us on overcoming the biggest obstacle you saw, and what can we do at home? Anyone want to volunteer to take that question first, or I'll call on you?
Yeah, I'll talk about it a little bit. So I think with Texas PCI, one of the largest hurdles that we've had as far as like measuring our success has just been time. So we've not been a cohesive program for very long in terms of if you're thinking of aquifer recharge, which it's like I said, very slow on the Ogallala aquifer. So we right now we are still operating on small separated pockets of restored areas. We have just now this year, as like a month ago, gotten to the point where we've finally closed the circle and moving into Palmer County, and we are, landowners are now speaking to their neighbors, which has been an awesome experience. We'll restore a Playa 2 years later. It's actually going really well for them. Their well hasn't lost pressure even when the rainfall fell, or the rainfall amount fell. And so they tell their neighbors, actually, yeah, it worked out pretty good. And then their neighbors give us a call. And then we go out there, restore their Playa. So now we've got 2 or 3 or 4 Playas in the same area, which of course is great for waterfowl. It's great for the wildlife, and it's even greater for the aquifer. So the biggest challenge has just been trying to close those gaps, and it's just going to take time, but we're getting there.
Fantastic. Samantha?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because I think that is something that we really, are working towards or figuring out. is the evaluation piece. I think the easy part for us, I'll just say this, is the easy part is measuring the tree canopy, right? We can see the growth, we can see the percentage increase, and we have some pretty good data to know, what a tree translates to, right? And we know that trees are worth, they're not just health benefits, but there's a big dollar sign on trees as far as the financial aspect they add to Dallas. The trickier part is evaluating the other components. So are our students getting healthier? Because how much are they going outside? How much are the trees contributing versus just the kids being outside? And so I think there's a lot of layers to our project that makes it a little more difficult. Or how much better are they doing in school? It really depends on which students are going outside and to what extent. And so that's difficult. We know it is helping, but getting the details and the numbers of the real impact beyond the value of the trees is probably the most difficult for us.
And then John.
Yes, ma'am.
So you guys presented a lot of the recreational fishing data. How are you applying that economic data to grow your project moving forward and to further show the value?
Well, one of the biggest ways is in my mind is, and when these projects are expensive, and you've got to show value back to the local economy, and above all, back to the ecosystem. So a lot of those applications, I feel like if you can show that, you can show this is a historical value that this brings above and beyond the ecological benefit of it, that allows you to secure those funds to do that work. There's the management of the oysters. There's still tons of growth within that that I might say industry. We're just purely taking care of them. I think there's things that we want to look at in the future. It's been baby steps, but the last 2 legislative sessions we've made huge progress, along with Parks and Wildlife and others, to secure the value of those oyster reefs. Again, primarily to the ecosystem, but to the local economies.
Absolutely. So for everyone that's taking part today, if you're a landowner, a community leader, a business leader, you can see that one of the ways that you can help these organizations is to supply data or to think about the broader return that you see with these initiatives and help in spreading the word. Rachel mentioned, as soon as that neighborly word of mouth started happening, they started to close the loop. So there's a lot of opportunity for folks to use their skill sets to help with some of the gaps that we have in creating bigger, long-term, more impactful projects across the state of Texas. And so with the last minute and a half before I need to close, I want to give each of you 30 seconds. And I'd like for you to share the one lesson you've learned or the one thing that everyone online today could take back to apply within their own community. Samantha, I'm going to start with you this time.
Okay, you put me on the spot, but I'll use the lesson from 2020. I think that it was interesting because 2020, I think a lot of people said, oh, you do outdoor classrooms now because of COVID. And we go, no, we've been doing it. And so I really think that this is a great time to build on this momentum. And I think that, people are starting to see we need to be outside. It's safer outside, generally speaking. We need to be breathing cleaner air. And so I would just, say that this is the opportunity because people are excited about it. And so if we can start, really getting schools to see the value of it, really pushing policy where, we're prioritizing outdoor curriculum and prioritizing the landscape outside of the school, now would be the time to do it.
Fantastic. John.
This project and some of the others we worked on, the immediate success that you sometimes see from these projects, especially, I'm gonna say Sabine, the water clarity, just the overall health of the water in that area. And what it's going to bring to that recreational angling community there. Then we have the same type of restoration projects where we can engage the kids, the school age kids and the educators to teach them the importance of the ecosystem. And you take it from the oysters, and then you expand that to marsh grass plantings and that type of deal. So it's a win-win deal. You restore it, you take care of it, and it's there for the future.
Fantastic. And then Rachel.
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson that we've learned so far, and I think it's applicable elsewhere, landowners, people who aren't already inside of a conservation organization or aren't working for an NGO or a governmental agency, it's not an us or them kind of thing. It's not a competition. It's not a one person gets the shared resource and the other just loses. There is a perfect answer, and really all the landowners that we work with, they want to do the right thing. They love their land. That's why they're farmers. That's why they're agriculturalists. They love wildlife. They love outside. And we've just really been enjoying, meeting with the landowners and finding ways that everybody wins. And that's kind of been the biggest lesson for us, is that it doesn't have to be one or the other.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you again, Samantha, Rachel, and John, for sharing your stories and your progress and your next steps. It's been inspirational, to say the least. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today to learn more. I think in summation, the opportunity is now. Everybody's talking about clean air, getting outside, mental health. We have an opportunity to work together to really make a change. And so encourage you to take that opportunity to use your resources, collaborate with your neighbors, collaborate with your communities. It's all of us together that will make a difference. And also share your results so that others can follow those best practices and learn from what you're doing, because there really are so many opportunities for us to move forward. So again, in closing, I want to thank all of our members, our partners, the folks who shared the stories today. And also, you will receive a survey shortly after this. So if you could just let us know, we're always trying to improve for the next virtual session. Speaking of, March 10th, we will have 3 more presentations about reimagining resources. I hope you will join us then. The registration link is live if you'd like to go ahead and register today. And we've been hosting these on the 10th of every month in celebration of our 10th anniversary at Texan by Nature. So if you check out Facebook and Instagram, we have kicked off, you'll see today, the February giveaway from partner organizations across Texas. So you have a chance to win some fun things. So again, thank you all for everything you do and for learning more about these conservation projects. And we look forward to following up with today's presentation and all questions answered. Thank you for being Texan by Nature. Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.